In this video, I help coach a friend for her technical interviews. She's specifically looking for a junior Python role. If you're looking to hire a junior dev in Michigan, check the end of show notes. We talk coding interviews, but also culture worries and everything else. Coding interviews are weird, and it's really useful to practice with experienced folks to learn some unexpected things about them. So, do you want to pop up your dev environment? If you're okay with screen sharing, basically, we could...
Oh, yeah. Oh, I can share just the Visual Studio.
Yeah, this time, what I was hoping for is that you would write me a function that takes a string as a parameter and determines whether that string has all unique characters. What I mean by that is that there are no repeated characters in the string. The letter A is only used at most once. The letter C is only used at most once. You can again treat capital A and and lowercase a as being separate, capital C, lowercase c as being separate. Just, you know, for the characters, assume that the way Python does equality is exactly how I want them distinguished.
Okay. Yeah, I got this one.
Cool.
All right. Are there unique strings? Or characters, right? Characters.
Yeah, you want every character to be unique.
Okay. Define unique a string. Then we're gonna do new list equals list a string, and we're gonna go length of so that one works. Do you want me to throw some data at it to make sure everything works?
No, that actually looks great. That looks fabulous. So tell me about the runtime of this.
Oh, well, I have to add a feature to test the time to see what the time is, but I'm assuming it's setting up the list. It's setting up I don't know how long Python's set runs. Because there's some stuff in Python that runs really long depending on what you do with it.
Yes.
Like Python random can really suck up time. So it depends on what Python's time is on the set.
All right, well, let's talk through it. So unique, you pass it a string. Assume the string's going to be of length n, you know, for our order n stuff. New list equals list a string. So how fast is that line individually?
To create a list out of it?
Yeah.
I don't know the runtimes of the Python list and set. I mean, it depends on the size of the string, right? I mean, if we have a 3-page text file worth of characters, which you can't because there's only so many characters that it can actually, but making that list would be a little slightly bigger, but.
Sure. So what I'll say is anytime you make a thing full of data, it's going to have to copy the data. And so there is no way that making a new list from an order n thing can be any faster than order n, right?
Okay, yeah.
Because it's got to touch everything. It's got to hit every piece of data. And if there's n pieces of data, it's got to touch all n pieces of data. So it can't be faster than linear. In this case, it is linear, but it can't be faster than linear.
Okay.
Yeah, so that line's O of n. Great. Length of string equals len new list. Any idea how fast that runs?
I'm assuming that's the length is built into the list. You know what I'm saying? Like when it builds the list, it automatically stores the data as the size of the list. So that's already there. So it's just grabbing it.
Good. That's what Ruby does with strings. C doesn't actually do that with linked lists, sadly, but Python probably does. That's a much saner way to do it. Great. Fabulous. Okay, set of string equals set new list. Any idea how long that takes to run?
That's going to have to go through every item and compare it to the set. Like I could do that in a for loop for myself and not use the set, the actual built-in.
You could.
So it's gonna have to compare go through each character and compare to the set. It's gonna have to say, is this in the set? It's not. Let's add it, and then it goes to the next character. I don't think that's going to be any longer than the list, honestly.
Okay, so then,
Tiny bit.
All right, length of set equals len set of string. How long does it take?
Built in, I think so.
So again, you're thinking constant time.
Yeah.
Fabulous. All right, if length of set equals length of string, return true, else false. That whole thing, of course, is going to be constant time. You know, there's nothing complicated there. There's nothing that handles anything that's not an integer. All right, so assuming we're right on each of these runtimes, what's the runtime of the whole
thing? Linear, so O to the n, right?
Yep. O then. Yep. O then. Yeah, because when you add them together, it's just the slowest, and in this case, the slowest is linear. So yep, that's exactly right. Cool. So when you're asked about the runtime, you can basically do that same thing, is you can look through the lines and basically say, how fast is this? How fast is this? You can also say, what's the slowest operation? Because if you're just going to go through and say, how fast is this? And then pick the slowest, you can also look for the slowest operation.
Right. And I'm assuming the slowest is going to be that set, because that's going to have to...
Creating the set, yeah, does all the actual work here. The other thing, well, length of set is something that could actually be slower. Sets aren't necessarily optimized for that, but it's going to be linear instead of constant in that case. So it's going to be the same speed as building the set.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing I'm not sure about. I'm pretty sure that the length of a list is kind of kept track of as the list is built in Python, but yeah. I'm not absolutely sure.
I'm not absolutely sure either, and it's even less likely with a set. Taking the total size of the set is a somewhat less common operation. So it's more likely to be linear. I'd have to look it up to be sure, but it's probably linear. I would expect that in most languages. Cool. Yeah, this works. Well done. Let's see. We probably got time for one more. Okay. I had asked you a palindrome question last time, and I've got a simpler palindrome question this time. I mean the same thing by palindrome now that I did then. You know, same forwards and backwards. Okay. Say I hand you a string. I want you to write me a method that determines whether that string could be a permutation of a palindrome. You remember what a palindrome is? You know what a permutation is?
I'm not sure. I've heard the word a million times, but I need context.
It's a reordering. It's a scrambling of it.
Oh, so it's got the same characters as the...
Exactly. Could it have the same characters as a palindrome? Is this a string that could have the same characters as a palindrome?
But they don't have to be in the same order. It just has to have the same characters.
Yeah, it's a permutation, so they can be scrambled.
So I'm going to have to check and see if it's a palindrome first, and then...
but I'm not handing you the string as a palindrome. I'm handing you the string that either can be or can't be a permutation of a palindrome.
Oh, so can it possibly be a palindrome with the characters that are in it?
Yeah. Could you make a palindrome out of those characters with the same number of each one? You know, if it has 3 n's in it, then, you know, could you have a palindrome that has 3 n's as part of it? If I give you a string with, you know, 2 e's and 2 f's.
Gotcha.
You could make that into a palindrome. You could do E, F, F, E, or the opposite.
I think I got the spelling of palindrome down finally.
You did. You did. Well done.
All right.
You may want to practice permutation. That's another one they're going to ask on interviews.
Yeah. And I kind of know what it is, but I think the confidence thing is like the biggest thing. Yeah. It's like something there, and I'm like, I'm not sure, and I hate to say something that's wrong and then be dinged for it. Then so that confidence thing really screws you up, you know.
What I'll say about that is that keep in mind they're evaluating you as a coworker, and a coworker who tries to be right and tries to sort of bluff their way through it is a lot more irritating than a coworker who doesn't know it but knows they don't know it, or who says something like, I think it's X, does that sound right? Like, I mean, that's the kind of person you'd like to work with, right? Is you would much rather they tell you when they don't know than try to bluff their way through.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I had at the paper mill, this probably doesn't pertain, but we had to cut the tubes for this paper to go onto. And we put them in the racks, and one of my jobs was to cut like 40 tubes so that the next shift would have their tubes and they could cut 40 for the next shift.
Sure.
And instead of stacking them 5 rows of 4, I was stacking them 4 rows of 5.
Okay.
And this guy just got so mad at me. No, you're doing that all wrong. It has to be, you got to put them in 5 rows. And I'm like, it's the exact same. 4 times 5 is 20. 4 times 5 times 4 is 20. I don't understand why you're so upset. He was really upset at me. I don't know what it was. It was weird.
Yeah, I don't know enough about a paper mill to know if that makes the slightest difference.
But yeah, I really, because our rack was so huge that we never filled it up. So I really don't think it mattered how I put them in there. I just wanted to put them in
Sure.
5 at a time.
Totally.
Okay, so characters in the string can be made into a palindrome. Return true if they can not be made into a palindrome. Return false. And cool. How are we going to do that? We're going to do, so for a palindrome, it has to have, palindrome cannot be even length.
Sure it can.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you worked through this. You had that, like the even length and the odd length were two kind of separate things, but you did have to work through both.
And that's odd. That can be palindrome.
Yeah.
So the even and odd amount of numbers isn't going to matter because like that one has 5 letters and it's palindrome, so that's not going to happen. It can have even numbers and be a. So, but the 2 ends have to be the same. The middles have to match up. It could be like that. It could be like that.
Yeah.
It could be 3 letters. So we're kind of going to be going through it again to compare, start at the middle and move out just like we did with the other one.
You could, but keep in mind now you don't know the order.
Well, because it could be a mixed up string.
Yeah. It's assumed to be a permutation. It's assumed to be scrambled.
So if we do, let's do this. Let's compare. I just need to see it, like I said before.
Yeah.
I think that was the problem last time is I couldn't see it in my head, so it was too hard.
Yeah. One thing you could do is try to come up with a string that cannot be a scrambled palindrome.
Okay.
You're looking at the yes, but sometimes it helps to see the yes and the no.
Right.
Yep. Like, there's no way to turn that into a palindrome. Perfect.
Because there's letters that don't match up. There can only be one letter in any palindrome that doesn't match the rest of them, and that would be the middle letter.
Yep.
If the middle. So for this one, how would I look at it and say it's not a palindrome because the letter on the end doesn't match the letter at the beginning? So we got to match.
Yeah, but keep in mind, I can give you those letters in any order. If I gave you P-I-E-P, then that also can't be a palindrome.
Right.
Like there's no way to turn that into a palindrome in the same way because it's the same letters.
Okay. So if this one was mixed up, it would have 3 P's and 2 U's.
Mm-hmm.
And if this one was mixed up, it would have 3 U's, 2 P's. I don't think that helps me at all. But this one that's wrong has only 2 matching letters.
Yeah.
I don't like palindromes.
Yeah, they're kind of common on interviews because they're slightly weird. Because they're something where it can be interesting to do algorithms around them because they've got a little complexity, but most people don't already know all the answers.
Yeah.
For the same reason, you'll see a lot of permutations, scrambled letters, and occasionally anagrams, where you rearrange the letters of one word into another recognizable word. Those are hard, though. Watch out for those. Those are harder than they look.
Gotcha. Well, that's not going to help me with these palindromes because they can be. They don't even have to be real words, right? They just be scrambled mush.
Yep, absolutely. All right. So, yeah, you know that something with 3 of one letter and 2 of another seems to be a palindrome, and that makes sense because, like you say, you've got one non-matching letter in the middle and you've got 2 other pairs. And you know pipe for whatever reason, is not. So something with two of one letter, one of another one is not a palindrome. So there's probably some kind of a pattern there.
That's what I'm looking for, is the pattern. I know there's a pattern to this, otherwise it wouldn't be a question that people use,
Yeah, there has to be some way to answer it.
Okay, so if it's odd, it's going to have 3 of a letter and 2 of a letter equals 5. That's the total number. And if it's not a palindrome, it's going to have 1 of. It definitely can't have 1 of something in it without it being a middle letter. So we could check for that first, since I know that to be true, right?
Yeah, you can check that.
That's the one I got so far, so we'll do that. So that one, it would have to be odd for the letter to be in the middle.
Yeah.
So we're going to check for odd first. Length. Length. Oops. Spell it right. That'll help. If length modulo 2 equals 0, it's even. We're going to do something here. Else it's odd. We're going to say check to see if it's only got 1 letter that is not. Because it could be, I lost where I was going with that. It can only have, otherwise it can't have. Okay. So,
well, and there's one other thing you've been using, looking for the pattern that you haven't got yet in your method. That you have, I mean, I'm sure you'll get there, but you haven't done it yet. Because like a string there might be pipe, or it might be, U, P, 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 U, or, it could be the same thing in a different order. But what you're actually, sitting and thinking about right now, what you're trying to go based on is the 3 U's and 2 P's, right?
Yeah, just my example to set me up to see what's going on.
Yeah, and so when you say you're going to check if there's 1 of, like, you haven't checked whether there's 1 of something yet. That's...
We'll make this a separate one, because we're just checking to see if there's 1 of. Because if it's modulated by 2, if it's even and it has 1 of, it can't be set up to be a palindrome.
Yeah.
If it's even. So that we'll know is false, so we'll go.
Yeah, if it's even, you know a lot about it. I mean, if it's odd, you also know a fair bit about it, but... So let me point out what you're using up there that you don't currently have is a count by character. You know what I mean?
Ooh, I think so, yeah.
For each character, you're counting how many of that character there are. Because if you know it's a permuted string, the only real information you're getting out of it is how many of each character they are. The order doesn't matter. It doesn't help you because you know the order is scrambled.
All right. Yep. So
By the way, if we were doing this in more of a real interview setting, time-wise, I would be bringing things to a halt. I don't feel like we need to do that if you don't want to. We can keep working through this, but that's where we are on time. Now you know.
Okay. Wow, they expect you to get it done fast, huh?
They do.
Would
They
they
do.
do this with new people too, like brand new juniors?
Well, so you got through one question successfully and rapidly, and then you kind of got bogged down in this one. Uh, it turns out there are some faster ways to do this.
I
Yeah,
know there's tricks. There's tricks to everything, man. Like
yeah,
that's why kind of Code Wars kind of gets me aggravated sometimes
yeah.
because they'll give you
Well,
this problem and it'll be this big long story, and then but actually they're just looking for this very specific algorithm. Like I'm here to learn these algorithms, not for you to trick me. Yeah.
part of the reason they do that, and you can decide if it's a good reason or a bad reason, is that very often on the job, it's a similar kind of thing. There's often a giant forest of details on whatever problem you're actually approaching, and it turns out there's one or two things that if you can pick them out of the whole mess that is your job that day, suddenly there's a really easy answer. And if you're not good at picking that couple of things out, then you can find yourself in the weeds trying to solve the problem in a way that is really slow or completely wrong, just because you're looking at the wrong details.
Oh, so like if this was on the job thing, I would just Google how to find how to find out if something's a palindrome in Python.
Yeah, no, that's fair. And in fact, this is fairly unlikely to be an on-the-job one. This is a similar level of detail, but yeah, on-the-job stuff. You're not likely to get palindrome questions on the job, which is part of why they ask them in interviews, because you're not likely to have seen the question before. But the flip side of that is it's suddenly an artificial situation where if you've gone and learned a whole bunch of random stuff about palindromes, you've got a big advantage in job interviews. Yeah.
All right. Well, we can wrap it up and maybe tell me what the trick is here.
Sure, absolutely. So I was kind of driving you in the direction of character count, because it turns out character count is the key to this whole thing, which makes sense. It's a permutation, and you don't know what the actual order is. All you really have to go on is character count. So you do the character count. Now you're most of the way there. Let me talk it through the way you were getting at it. For an even length palindrome, you know that there have to be an even number of every character. There could be 2 Bs, there could be 0 Bs, there could be 6 Bs, but there can't be 5 Bs if it's an even length palindrome, right? It'll never be okay. You can't have an odd number of anything with that middle character. And with an odd length palindrome, you get one middle character. Only one. Now, in your example with 3 Ns, it's not that, the middle character means that there can be one thing that there's one of. It could be one thing that there's 3 of, or 5 of. But there can only be one of those. And so once you've got the character counts, you can have at most one odd number of characters.
Okay. But after that, there must be more to it, right? Because what if this thing is 20 characters long?
Even if it's 20 characters long, it turns out that if it can be a permutation of a palindrome, you're kind of canceling out pairs of the same character mentally. You don't write the algorithm that way. But pretend what you did was you went, oh, I see 2 Ns. I'm going to cancel them both out because that could be a palindrome. I could move them to the end. Oh, I see 6 Es. I'm going to cancel all 6 out because that's 3 pairs of Es. I could move them to the end and make a palindrome. Oh, I see 3 Ns. I'm going to cancel out 2 of them. And so at the very end, after you've canceled everything out, you're either going to be left with 1 left over, in which case it's in the middle, or you're going to be left with more than that, in which case there's no way to make it a palindrome. But it turns out there's an easier way to do the same thing I mentioned where you're canceling pairs, and that's go through and count the characters, just like you were doing with the dictionary. And then once you've done that, go through the dictionary and see if you ever see any odd counts, because you can have 1 odd count and it's still possible to be a palindrome. But if you ever have more than 1 odd count, it's not a palindrome, and you're all done.
That makes sense. All right. I knew there were, I was trying to figure it out here.
Yeah.
Right here, I was trying to get that. I was like, there's a pattern. I know it. Dang it.
Especially for relatively simple problems. And you're looking at a junior interview, so most of the problems they give you are going to be relatively simple. It's often going to make a lot of sense to spend some time up front playing with it. And you may want to work it out on paper. I'm an old guy, so I'm used to thinking of them as giving you a whiteboard for it. But online, your best bet's going to be paper. Anything you can do on a computer won't be as good at being paper as paper is. And you may just want to kind of like mess around with it for a little bit and try a few things like you were doing in the text file. It's just I find it's more productive on paper. You may or may not, but you probably will. most people, it works better on paper. And so when you do that, you can kind of play around with it, and that would be how you'd figure out something like, oh, it doesn't matter what order they give it to me, and it just matters how many they give me of each character. Oh, hey, look, for the even length ones, here's a bunch of even length ones. But yeah, there's usually some kind of a trick to it, and so it's usually worth your time to sit for certainly 3 to 5 minutes, and often longer than that, just kind of staring at it and playing with it, just to try and find the trick. Because in the same way that, when I gave you the whole, no non-unique characters one, and you blazed through that, the trick was to figure out that it was with a set. And the examples that I saw, the example answers I saw for that are pretty much doing that by building your own set. But that was great. You found a Python way to do it, which made it really trivial. Well done, awesome. But even if you built your own, it would be the same kind of thing. You would you would take a dictionary, and you would go through, and you would put in the keys, and it would work almost exactly like the character counting. And then you would go through, and if the character count is greater than 1 for anything, then it's not unique. Same kind of thing. Yeah. And so yeah, there's going to be a trick to most of these problems. The other thing is, it'll feel less like there's a trick once you've been doing this longer, just because a lot of these things aren't going to feel like tricks anymore. They're going to feel like Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same thing as the jargon. It's the same thing as learning the weird words for things. As you get really used to it, it'll feel less like a trick, because it's just what you build everything out of.
Yeah. There's definitely a language barrier for new people, because like when I first started, it was just, they would throw all these words at you and go, well, if you don't understand, you're not smart enough to do this. Like, what? It's like you're speaking gibberish to me right now, and that's not fair.
Yeah. Well, one thing you'll find about programmers, don't say this to them in the job interview, is that programmers are very insecure, because what we do isn't quite math, and it isn't quite engineering, and it isn't quite any of these existing disciplines. And we're very impressed by like civil engineers and mathematicians and people that do this kind of thing. But what we do isn't really the same as what any of them do. And between you and me, it's a lot easier. Like a civil engineer has to make sure that the bridge doesn't fall down and kill people, and we're not in that camp. We're just not. And a mathematician, speaking as somebody with a math degree, is dealing with the inflexible and horrible laws of the universe itself. I mean, you get a certain amount of playfulness, but like in the end, math is a very exact sort of discipline. And the nice thing about computers is it's not. You can do a certain amount of squeezing things down and taking the long way around, and I'll use a brute force algorithm for this, and I'll squeeze this into something that mostly works, and if it doesn't work, it'll bring up an error message. You can't do that in a theorem. That doesn't work if you're trying to prove a law of nature, but it works fine if you're trying to build a website that works for 99 out of 100 people and gets 70 of them to give you money. Like, it's cool. Like, that's a win. Yeah. So a lot of the stuff that's hard, especially in job interviews, is the place where we're mimicking engineers and mathematicians badly. Why do we talk about permutations instead of saying the letters are scrambled? Well, a permutation is what a mathematician would say, especially the kind of mathematician that would have like a pocket protector with the pens there that isn't even leaking, like that mathematician.
That isn't even leaking. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. And I get it. It's just, I can see how I've seen a lot of new people besides me. It's changed though. It's gotten so much better, but I've seen people, they just want to give up because they're like, okay, then I'm not good enough. And they walk away like, no.
Yeah. No, thinking of it as a language barrier is a really good way to handle it. It is. It's a language barrier. There are giant glossaries of these things. It's not a language barrier that people truly try to protect. It's not like the French where if you show up and you're speaking slightly wrong, they'll never tell you anything about it. But definitely programmer culture can be very unwelcoming. I don't really get to say that we're a soft, fluffy, welcoming group overall in all places. I live in Rubyland, and we are, for programmers, very welcoming. And the fact that the Ruby community counts as really welcoming for programmers is more of a scathing indictment of the rest of the programming world than it is a sign that the Ruby community would be really welcoming among like human communities. You're going to have an easier time with golfers than Ruby programmers, even though Ruby programmers are really good for programmers. So it's easy to find glossaries, but the problem is you may not have the easiest time learning, by reading through glossaries and memorizing. Remembering that a permutation is scrambled letters. If you never use what a permutation is, then there's no particular reason for you to care, and there's no reason for you to have an easy time memorizing it. But that's part of the reason we do the interview prep stuff, is that many of the things in the job interviews are not the same things we use on the job. Permutations are a great example. Palindromes are another great example. Both. And both of them are in the interviews more than the actual job because it sounds like math. It sounds impressive. All right, great. Well, so then when you talk about algorithms practice, which I think is a great idea, a lot of what it's teaching you is this same kind of thing, is the language barrier. Here we go. I picked up that copy of Cracking the Coding Interview, and it's a tome. Like, that's... Yeah,
I got mine too a couple days ago. Like, whoa, this thing is big.
It's huge. It's huge, which means that the right answer is not to just work through all of them. I mean, you're not going to memorize it all. You shouldn't really try. But yeah, when she says palindrome permutation, given a string, write a function to check if it is a permutation of a palindrome. A palindrome is a word or phrase that is the same forwards and backwards. A permutation is a rearrangement of letters. The palindrome does not need to be limited to just dictionary words. In some sense, she's fully explained that. And by in some sense, I mean in the sense that a programmer thinks a mathematician would use. It's true. A palindrome is a word or phrase that is the same forwards and backwards. But what you actually want to know about it is reverse the string, compare it, and if it turns out it's true, then it was a palindrome, which isn't what she says. But yeah, she put it like a programmer thinks a mathematician would. A permutation is a rearrangement of letters. Technically true, not how I'd explain it, but yeah, okay. And yeah, it's because it's because, like you say, it's a language learning thing. It's a language barrier thing. If you already know the word permutation, this is going to remind you of it. If you don't already know it, well, if you don't know what escalier is in French, they can give you a few hints. But if you didn't know before, you probably still don't know.
Mm-hmm. I don't know what that is.
Stairway.
Oh.
Now you know. It's spelled like escalier, but if you're French, bearing in mind my French accent is terrible, you say escalier. And so, you've got a copy of Cracking the Coding Interview. And so I'd say working through each one in turn doesn't do you much good, but reading through the problem description so that you're pretty sure you know what she means one after another can do you a huge amount of good, because that will show you which bits of vocabulary you're currently missing.
Yeah. I know that's a big chunk of what I absolutely need, because I just, 30 years of working in factory jobs did not improve my technical vocabulary. It improved my vocabulary in really bad ways.
Yeah. So. Well, you're for the junior jobs, you're competing with people fresh out of college, and they don't necessarily know any particular part of their anatomy from a hole in the ground either.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so what else we got for this, dude?
Well, I mean, this is sort of one complete job interview if you're asking me about the schedule, or do you mean what else is there for this problem?
No, I mean, what else would you like to do with this? Like, should I ask you questions like, what does your company do? What else is for their interview besides this part?
Yes, besides the technical interview.
Yeah.
Cool. No, that's a good question. So here, I'll tell you how I used to structure interview sequences, like the sort of whole interview that the person did, not just my particular part of it, and that'll probably help answer your question. So, a day of job interviews at a good startup that quizzes you pretty hard, which is what I mean when I say a good startup. You could decide what you think a good startup is going to start with somebody talking to you, first covering the real basics, just to make sure you've signed what you need to sign and you're the right person in the right place. And if you have any questions like where the bathroom is, they've handled that. Basic stuff. And then they'll talk a little bit about the company, they may ask, how did you find out about us? They may say something like, I see by your resume that you're, that you've been a developer for X number of years. But they're basically asking you warm-up social type questions. Now, before any of that, before you even get there, you've probably had a phone interview. You've probably talked to somebody for 40 minutes to an hour, depending on the place. Answered one extremely mild technical interview, maybe the equivalent of the find a unique character thing. That's a phone screen style question. That's not bad. It may even be easier than that. Like that can be on the hard side for a phone screen question. And there they'd have done a little bit of asking you things, but again, not grilling you, not quizzing you hard. In a phone screen, it's usually assumed that they just want to know that you're not completely incompetent. And if you're going to do your homework and find out what the company does and be a go-getter about the interview, you may do that after the phone interview. That's okay. Anyway, but you get there on the day, you talk to the person. The person who's talking to you first might be a software engineer, but might also just be somebody who's with the company and is saying hi. There's no guarantee that they're a technical person, and there's no guarantee they'll give you a technical question right at the beginning. It's also sometimes like a half-length interview. After that, you're going to do a series of technical questions that are designed to be different from each other. A good company will coordinate with the people who are going to be interviewing you ahead of time and basically say, okay, now you're going to do a design question, and you're going to do some kind of a string question, and you're going to do a more complicated data structure question, and I'm going to do a, something else. And what the different categories are depends on the company. It also depends on whether it's a junior or a senior candidate. But that way you should get different questions from each person. It's important. In each one of those interviews, if you just blaze through it, you're going to discover that there's a bunch of time at the end where they want to talk about non-technical questions. If there's a technical question, they may do a little bit, they'll probably do a little bit of just kind of social stuff up front, but they're probably going to move the technical question first because sometimes they take a long time. And so they don't want to use a bunch of time on non-technical questions and then give a technical question at the end and have you fail to complete it. Like that sucks all around. It's the same kind of thing we talked about last time. Like if you run a little bit over, they get very little signal from the technical interview. They can't tell if you were going to solve it or not. And so they're much better off putting the technical question early on in the interview, and a good interviewer will do that. But let's say you blaze through it. Some interviewers have a set of technical questions, and if you blaze through one, they'll move to the next. You blaze through the next one, they'll go to the next. Sometimes they're going to try to just get through a lot of technical questions. A few places do that. It's not common. Mostly they've got a technical question, and if you successfully get through it in a short time, great, fabulous. They check their mental checkbox on that you did it, and then they move to a non-technical sort of thing. By a non-technical sort of thing, this is the kind of questions you were asking about. They'll often look down at the resume and say something like, I see you worked at place, I see you said you did thing, tell me more about that. Just to make sure that if they pick a random thing off your resume, you did actually do it. You're not just completely lying about everything. And it's real, right? Like there are people who are fibbing a little or a lot on their resume, and sometimes you just ask them a question, and it's very obvious very quickly that they never did what they said they did. Or they did it in some very exaggerated way. You say, oh yeah, you say you worked on this operating system doing this. I don't know a lot about that. Tell me about that. And if their response starts with then okay, that was probably at best an exaggeration. But yeah, and so that's a really common one. A similar sort of thing is they might say something like, tell me about a time that you had an unpleasant surprise at work and you had to deal with it. The same kind of thing, except instead of fishing by saying this company, this thing you said, they'll kind of go fishing by here's a situation. Tell me about a time you had a disagreement with your boss. Tell me about a time you were really proud of some piece of work and you communicated it to the team. But something to, the kind of thing that suggests how to work in a general technical environment with other people. And by a technical environment, it doesn't even necessarily have to be programming, right? I mean, a lot of these questions, tell me about a time you had a disagreement with your boss. There's nothing all that special about doing that with a software engineering team. It's pretty much like any other team. Yeah. And so there's a lot of advice you've probably already gotten, stuff like be careful talking smack about your previous employers, because if you have a series of employers and you talk really badly about all of them, and then they hire you, how do they expect you to talk about them later?
Right.
It's, yeah. I mean, it's a lot of the non-technical stuff is not specific to software. There's going to be a certain amount of cultural gotchaing, and you're going to have trouble on that. You in particular, individually and personally, that's going to suck for you.
How the heck would I practice that?
That's, I don't know. So there's a few things I can tell you, and you can decide how many of them you have even the slightest interest in doing. You can pick up hobbies that sound good to geeks. As a really trivial example, you can binge read XKCD. You know XKCD, right? Ah, okay.
Aw, that one's cute, yeah.
It really is. Yeah, every so often he gets you, right? Like right in the fields. So yeah, and this is a great example of something where he talks about enough programmer stuff that programmers think of it as a programmer thing. So if you do that, I have literally like gone into a job interview. I forget which XKCD comic I had, but I had one of them on a T-shirt, and the guy who I'd never met before, looks at this XKCD shirt and literally says, "Okay, well, XKCD shirt, culture fit, check."
That doesn't seem fair, though, Noah. Because I mean,
oh, it's not. I didn't say it was fair.
I got to go in and pretend to be someone else. I mean, wouldn't they rather have someone be honest?
Wouldn't they rather have someone be honest? Have
you
met
this
people?
Is who I am. Isn't that better?
Isn't that better? You remember I told you that programmers are as a group insecure. A lot of this kind of boils down to group insecurity, and I wish I had a better way to tell you. Like Star Trek is another thing that's huge in programmer circles, and Star Wars for that matter, and sci-fi in general. And some of that is, as long as we're sitting around trying to build the future out of mechanical and electronic components, you can see how we can see how we'd sort of identify with sci-fi. You meet programmers who are women who wear dresses and makeup and do a good job on both of those and do more things like knitting. And it does tend to bother the boys club. And I don't know what to tell you about that. The best programmers tend to not care. The best programmers tend to be secure enough because they're good at what they do, that there's not a problem. But gamer culture has this problem too, right? It turns out the worse you are at playing the game, the less you want to allow anybody else into the club. And you're going to find that absolutely applies to computer programmers as well. And I would be severely remiss in my duties if I said to you, "Oh, that doesn't happen." Like, no, you need to assume that kind of thing is going to happen. One way to do it, one way to handle that, is to play the club games a little bit, which is why I say things like XKCD. Like, if you like it, then being able to quote a couple of relevant XKCD comics helps your case a little bit. And it's not that you have to know everything about XKCD, and I wouldn't recommend that as a competition. But if you can find a few things that feel like programmer hobbies, and over the long run, this shouldn't be a hardship, right? Over the long run, you're learning programming, you are programming, you want to be a programmer, you're going to naturally pick up a certain amount of this stuff. I mean, when you talk about reading Stack Overflow, like you talk about Stack Overflow and that's what you do, great, that's the same kind of thing. Being able to say, "Oh, last time I checked it on Stack Overflow, I saw," is the same kind of cultural marker. You are going to naturally pick them up as you go along because some of them are directly relevant to the job. Like Googling Stack Overflow answers is directly relevant to the job, and you're just picking that up. Like you're doing that. You don't have to go out of your way for it. You can go out of your way for it if you're trying to do better on the culture fit bit. You can look for places that already have more non-traditional programmers. You can look for places that hire boot campers, because even white guys coming out of boot camps tend to be weird as programmers go. They don't tend to be the absolutely standard fit. Well, they've often already had a career. They're often older. They're, boot campers tend to be people who didn't decide to do this, go to college to do this, go to the interviews right after college, and then work at the same place from college up until the present day. Like boot camp tends
we definitely weren't immersed in the culture from the beginning.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's to the extent there's a monoculture. The monoculture tends to be really embedded in programming and not necessarily doing a lot else. A lot of it is a kind of a shut-in culture that's really focused on this, which should make sense when you think about how imposing the vocabulary obstacles are, and there's just so much to learn. You know, there's it's constant. Like if you're doing web programming, you've got the HTML stuff and the CSS stuff and the JavaScript stuff, and then you're going to wind up using SQL on the back end. And like this is an enormous amount of stuff to learn. It was really intimidating to me when I switched from you know C and C++ back end side and had to pick up all these things. Like there's a lot of it. It's huge, even if you
and
are.
it's always changing too. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't stay constant. Like as soon as that's why I haven't picked up any of the frameworks yet. Because as soon
Yeah.
as I go to learn Node, nobody's gonna want Node anymore.
Yeah.
Like if I learn vanilla JavaScript really well, then none of these other frameworks are gonna bother me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great attitude. I think that's the exact right thing. And in the same way, I mean, you're probably going to need to pick up the subtleties of things like HTML and CSS and vanilla JavaScript because they're going to stick around. But yeah, latest JS framework, it's not worth your time to pick up. SQL at some point is going to be worth your time to pick up in the same way. Like it's not going anywhere. It's been here since the 70s. But it doesn't have to be the first thing you do either. You know, it's one more specialty, and it turns out that there are 100 specialties you get to choose between.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That makes me feel a little bit better. That I can get in. It just bothers me so much to think that I'm gonna have to like, because all your life you're growing up here and just be who you are, be proud of who you are, because who you are is who you are. You should be proud of that. And then you get into this realm and no, you need to be like us.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not what I've been taught my whole life. I've been taught my whole life to embrace who I am and enjoy that. And now suddenly it's like, that's not okay.
Yeah, well, watch all those people who told you to be who you are and you know really express yourself growing up and see which people they toss out and you'll suddenly realize that they had filters on that too.
Yeah. You got a good point there. That's true.
I don't know. At least the kind of people that said that to me, like they looked like horrific hypocrites if I actually took a broader view of the people in question. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. As far as I can tell, humans are mostly like that. Programmers are kind of rigid and kind of clannish and kind of insecure and kind of weird.
Maybe they're insecure because they spend so much time trying to wrap themselves around a culture that isn't their own.
Well, there is that. It doesn't help that this is a genuinely hard challenge, and you have to be kind of weird for it to make much sense. I don't mean to do it naturally because nobody does it naturally. I don't mean for it to be intuitive because it's never intuitive. I mean, most people see an obstacle this size and the payoff at the end and go, you know, like I got TV to watch. To go beyond a certain amount of anything, you have to be a little bit broken in one way or another. There has to be some reason this seems like a good deal to you. And I don't get to tell you what your personal reason is, but I do get to tell you you're going to need one.
Yeah. I don't have cable. No.
You know, solid. Well, no, so I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Texas. And of the three major TV networks, we got CBS. And on Sundays, sometimes kung fu movies. So I got almost no TV. The TV I got, there wasn't much there, and we weren't allowed to watch very much TV. And so I became a computer programmer because I had a computer before the internet sitting in the middle of nowhere and nothing to compete with it. We lived 4.2 miles outside of Huntsville, Texas, whose big claim to fame is that there's a penitentiary there. When you hear about people on death row in Texas, that's my hometown. There was nothing to do. Which was a giant advantage. No, like my programmer origin story is exactly what you said. It's the extreme version of we didn't have cable.
Cool. All right. Well, that makes me feel a little bit better that I still think there's a way to get in without like mutating myself, you know?
Well,
I will try to catch on to some of the culture, but
yeah. There are a lot of ways to get in choosing how you mutate yourself. I don't think there are any ways to get in without mutating yourself, just because every culture I know forces you to do that. That's not just programmers, that's everybody. But programmers are going to make you at least know their stuff and be able to recognize some references to it, which I'll grant you is annoying.
Cool. Yeah, it's kind of like there's a Doctor Who fandom where people are crazy strict about details and the original doctors, and these are some of the people that freaked out when Jodie Whittaker became the new female doctor. Doctor Who can't be a female? What? I've been waiting 50 years. Well, not 50. It's been a lot longer than I've been alive, but I've been waiting my whole life for a female Doctor Who, and you guys are going to step in and try and wreck this for me because you don't want it to be a female. It doesn't belong to you, but they really do. Like, they think they own it. And like nobody else, they're gatekeeping it, basically.
And I mean, I could say what you need to do is to be bigger hearted and broader minded than those folks, and at the same time kind of cynical, so that you can see around it and you can see where they're being small and vicious about their gatekeeping and kind of outmaneuver them on it. And if you can do that, I'm not going to say don't do that. That's a really good strategy where you can do it. But a lot of that comes from confidence and from the easy feeling of you not having to worry too much about what they're in the middle of doing. And as far as I can tell, that only comes from experience. Like, a lot of what will eventually work on this is just grinding and grinding and grinding on it and seeing the stuff for yourself. And eventually you get confident enough about it that when somebody puts down your abilities, you understand that it's not you, it's them. But you need the experience behind that, because up to a certain point, you shouldn't already be convinced that anytime anyone criticizes your work, it's not you, it's them. Like, that's a terrible thing if you do it too early. Yeah, exactly. And so the right thing, of course, is to know when it's one and when it's the other, and successfully, which you can't do without experience. I mean, I could tell you to just always do it right, but that's like saying writing code with no bugs is easy. You just don't write the bugs. Right. Technically true, but yeah, it's the same kind of problem. And so, as I assume that you're, in this whole development thing for the long haul. I'm going to talk to you as though you're in this whole development thing for the long haul, because I hope everybody is, and it's been good to me, and that's my biases are that everybody should do that. So I'm going to act according to those biases unless you tell me otherwise. But yeah, the way you deal with it for the long haul is just to get confident by repeatedly doing it. To get to the point where you don't need the other person's approval desperately. And so if the other person is withholding approval as a way of being manipulative, your response is not, they don't like me, but instead is, it's some people suck. Which is true.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, on the culture fit, again, you can flag specifically to do that. Like, you can show up in an XKCD t-shirt, or you can show up in something like that, or you can claim your numeric Stack Overflow reputation on your resume prominently. There are a lot of ways that you can signal that if what you want to do is to say, hey, look, I'm one of you. You can also go the opposite direction. You can mention a whole bunch of hobbies that are the exact opposite of standard programmer stuff. You can do a weird combination of them. I mean, it turns out that being bizarre is acceptable in programmer culture if you do it in a flamboyant way. And so my resume specifically mentions that I have both professional massage therapy training and hypnotherapy training. And it's a one-liner, and it's, just tossed off there. But the fact that it's something weird, I stick that in there, and it sort of makes them stop a minute and go, okay, well, maybe there is something odd here. Maybe I should actually look. You either have to conform to their rigid molds so that they skate right by you and go, oh yeah, this is just Tuesday, or you have to get them to stop and think, which is harder with anybody, programmers included. And I don't get to tell you which of those is going to be the winning strategy for you, because it depends on them and it depends on you.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that helps a lot. It helps just being able to talk through it with someone,
Absolutely. Being able to ask the questions, and I'm definitely trying to tell you, in those places where it isn't you, it's them, because there are absolutely some of those places.
Well, yeah, and I want in real bad, but I don't know that I want to go in somewhere that's gonna force me into this, this shell that I have to contain myself in to fit in. I don't care how much money they pay me. That sounds awful.
Yeah. Well, and your best bet there is to find where there are already a lot of boot campers, or a lot of women, or a lot of, racial minorities or similar. Find people that are going to have that same conundrum, that are going to have that same problem, and find out where they gather and stay. Because those are the places where the conditions are not going to be too horrible. And the usual guideline for that is look for people like that in leadership positions. you can do that by finding one or more leaders that you respect and sort of following them. I don't know. You've probably seen folks on Twitter you like, and if you haven't, it's not hard to get a list. I immediately think of like Marco Rogers, for example, and he has a strong tendency to point in other people's direction. So once you find him, it's not hard to find a lot of people. But there are similar folks, and they're not that hard to find, and you can kind of decide who would be comfortable in the same place you want to be comfortable in, and then look for where those folks wind up. And ask questions. If you go to a random company, because you're not going to know about a random company, you go to a random company and you basically say, do you have women here? Do you have boot camp graduates here? Do you have racial minorities here? And what you want to avoid are answers like, you'll be the first. I'm sure understand why that's a terrible answer. Oh, we had one, but they left. Oh, we've got this one, but she's not amazing, so we're looking for somebody who just fits in better. Obviously,
that would be a run out the door.
Like, yeah,
tell exactly. Me that. That's another thing too. I think people don't realize, if employers talk bad about their employees, it's exactly the same thing as if I come in talking bad about my former employers. This is showing more about them than it is about anything.
Yeah, and again, this is stuff where it's not really specific to development, other than the fact that, again, developer culture is kind of rigid and kind of insecure, and you've dealt with rigid, insecure people before. This software developers aren't your first go around there.
Right.
And so, yeah, a lot of this is just, once you ask them, it would be hard for me to tell a new university graduate how to interpret the answers, but it's not hard for me to tell you how to interpret the answers. I can just tell you it works like you think it does.
Yep. So I have a tiny advantage over all those college people.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The thing about college, especially college for software development, is it doesn't work at all like the job. Like it's actually fairly lousy training for the job. Speaking as somebody who got the elite college degree and then has been working on this since 1998 full time. It's not that it taught me nothing useful, but their focus was just not on the job. It was on stuff. It was on stuff that was kind of related to it. Occasionally it's useful. Mostly it's interesting trivia. But I'll tell you, while I can still go through how you show the amortized runtime performance of a binomial heap for various things, I have never seen a binomial heap used in production ever. And there's a lot of things like that. There's a lot of stuff where I suppose I'm glad to have the grounding in theory, but the way you get a grounding in theory is to play with a lot of things that nobody ever uses because they're a bad idea.
Cool.
Yeah. I wish I knew a good thing to tell you about sort of how to find the companies that are good on the culture thing, but I am exactly the wrong person to be telling you that. The kind of places that are going to roll out the red carpet for me are in most cases exactly who you don't want. And so this is one of those things where I should tell you to find a mentor who is more like what you're looking for. Find somebody who's maybe an older boot camp graduate, or was, best yet is if they were 3 to 5 years ago. But you find somebody like that who's found a happy place and stayed there for a few years. And that's, yeah.
Yeah. I got to start applying. I haven't applied in weeks.
That's important. Yeah.
That's important. I got to do that. But with everything going on right now, with all these people getting laid off, I got some time to learn, because there's a lot of people looking for jobs right now. They aren't going to want a newbie. So I got time to pack in some more learning right now.
Yeah, yes and no. I'll tell you that during all the major downturns in the software industry, because I have looked for a job regularly over most of my career, I've done job hunting through all of those downturns. I've been looking for a job during at least part of all of those downturns, and I've never had trouble. And so what I'll say there is, if you learn to interview well and you learn to be good at what you do, you are ludicrously employable doing this. Did you watch the video that I posted earlier today, the one about the mid-career slump?
No, I didn't. No.
Okay. It's in it's all good. I think you were working. No, there were It's in the Slack. I think I posted it to the pre-release blog posts channel, so you plenty of time to look at it. It's on YouTube now. It's linked there. Um, so every time you add one of these specialties, we talk about you'll have to understand HTML, you'll have to understand SQL, you'll have to add. Every time you add one of those specialties, if you do a good job at it, you have added in current working conditions another lifetime worth of engineering jobs. Like that would be enough to keep you employed in fairly decent jobs for the rest of your life. So once you've added 4 or 5 of those, you've effectively got 4 or 5 competing fairly good lifetime employments, available, because you can work at any of those specialties and people are almost always looking for them. And so once you've got a bunch of them, like you're fully employable forever. Now you're not always going to like all those jobs, but if you've got a bunch of competing possibilities, if you get to combine them and use them together, it turns out you'll get overall better jobs constantly. So yeah, part of what you're trying to do, and this will sound terrible, certainly did to me, part of what you're trying to do is to sort of limp your way through those early jobs, whether they're good or not. I mean, maybe you get lucky. Maybe you get like, I've met a few people who like go to an early job and it's just amazing and they stay there for many years. And I've always envied that. I've never been any good at that. I don't know if it was me or the jobs or both. Okay, it was probably both. But yeah, part of what you're doing is once you've limped your way through the earlier jobs, you're going to learn some things to avoid. You're going to learn some things to do. You're going to learn how to be more self-managing. You're going to learn what the job thinks the job actually is, as opposed to any of the things they tell you early on. There's a lot of things that, as far as I can tell, are just mistakes you have to make early on, unless you are ludicrously lucky in getting a local mentor in your same job that is actually worth something. And occasionally I meet people like that. The people who are like that are more likely to stay, and they're more likely to succeed, and they're more likely to get promoted. So it's not hard to pick them out of a crowd, but there aren't very many.
That makes sense.
Kind of. But
no,
yeah.
It does. I mean, it's just, I forgot what I was going to say now. I just feel like there's this void in tech, because like I've been writing those articles. You've seen them, the blue collar valued articles.
Yep.
Where I see the internships when I go to apply and stuff, and they only want recent grads or people going to university to apply for these jobs, and that's excluding a lot of people.
Yeah.
If that's all you're looking for, and that right there tells me you don't want diversity. You want the kids that are kids or adults, sometimes older people go to college, that are privileged enough or afforded enough to go to college.
Tech is infamous, for wanting a monoculture. Absolutely. It's terrible because so I spend a lot of time talking to the recruiters at any given job that I do. I guess not at Appfolio because I wasn't physically around them, but I've spent many years talking to the recruiters at every job because if you can't get good people, you're not going to do all that well overall. Getting good people is important. And the thing to remember about recruiters is they're going to try and bring in more of whatever management approves, which means that if management only has a few people they're going to say yes to, it doesn't matter who they tell the recruiters they want. Like if they say, bring in everything, and they bring in everything, and there's like 3 things that the managers will actually accept, they're going to spend their time looking for more of those 3 things that the managers will accept, right? I mean,
right.
They're paid on commission. like all humans, they're good at recognizing patterns. And if you don't say the pattern, it doesn't matter. It turns out if they're in a position to get paid $25,000 or $30,000 for seeing the pattern, they'll see the pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll see that pattern. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. Well, it's past 1 a.m. here, so I should get back into bed. But it's been great talking to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.